I'd like to thank Nathan Lusher, second of the name, and Freedom Marheim for putting this together. I'm Troy Spears. I am this year's chairperson for the Stanislaus Humanists, and we just organized recently. And we didn't bring any literature because that's how new we are. But if you go to our website, stanislaushumanists.org, you can see the kind of events that we're having and also donate or become a member online. And also, if you enjoy this talk, we're having a coffee get-together at the Queen Bean tomorrow at 11. And we have a music thing in series that we get together and pretend to play music. And then next week is our big brunch here in Turlock, which is at Panera's at 10 a.m. So it's usually about 20, 25 people. So get there early to get a space. And I'd like to turn it over to Dave Biston, who is quite the activist in this area.
Thank you, Troy. Welcome, everybody. How are you guys tonight? Good. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. And like Troy said, I want to thank Nathan for helping us get everything together, and especially everyone that's involved with the Stanislaus Humanists. Let's see, where am I supposed to stand here? I thought I heard some feedback. The Stanislaus Humanists have been doing such a great job in the past couple of months growing and creating new events. And if you are from the area, Turlock, Modesto, Merced, anywhere in this vicinity, 25, 30 miles around, come on over and join Troy and his group, because they do have a lot of cool events. Like he said, you can go to stanislaushumanists.org, and it's a meetup page where you can RSVP. It's completely free to be a part of that. It can even be anonymous if you want it to be. You don't have to upload a picture or anything like that. It's just a great place to meet other like-minded people. I also want to thank all the volunteers who helped set things up and coordinate. I want to thank CSU Stanislaus. How about that? For letting us use this facility at no cost to us. I want to thank the Turlock Journal for telling the city about us just yesterday. That was great to see. And most importantly, I want to thank Dan Barker and there he is, and the Freedom from Religion Foundation for coming all the way out here from Wisconsin to join us, and a couple other cities on his California tour. Thanks, Dan, for being out here. And so, like Troy was saying, the San Joaquin Valley Coalition of Reason, which includes the Stanislaus Humanists and the Stockton area atheists and freethinkers, we're a community of non-believers. We just want to hang out with each other and have a good time, occasionally maybe even volunteer or do a little bit of activism or do a little bit of education or be a part of something bigger. I think if you're the kind of person who's not going to church, that doesn't mean you turn off that social aspect of your life, right? And it's good to get out and hang out with other people, to be a part of the bigger community, to just talk about whatever it is that's on your mind. We don't, if you're curious about these brunches that we have and these other events, we don't just sit around all morning and say, well, is there a God yet? No, okay, well that's it, we're done. It's not like that. We talk about all kinds of things. We talk about politics, we talk about movies and pop culture, we talk about sports, we talk about Star Trek way too much, all kinds of things. And so whatever it is you're into, come and join us at all of these different kinds of events. And we do have a bunch of them. We have brunches, we have up in Lodi a monthly wine and art hop. We have craft making and movie nights in Turlock and Modesto and in Lodi. We have book clubs, we have game nights. Outdoor and family events. In fact, today, just a few hours ago in Manteca, we did a bowling thing for the secular families within our group. We have karaoke and drinking that Troy mentioned, and volunteer opportunities. So all kinds of things that we have going on. And you can see all of this stuff on either of our websites for the Stanislaus Humanists or the Stockton Area Atheists and Freethinkers. Especially important, a couple events I wanted to call attention to. We're going to be at the Stockton Asparagus Festival. How many of you guys have gone to that in the past? Good. It's a lot of fun, especially if you have kids. So if you want to, come on out to the Stockton Asparagus Festival and find us. Our groups will be there. We have a nice little tent out by the water. You can come and hang out, get a bottle of water, or just chat with us. If you want to volunteer and be there with us for a set amount of time, just let me know, and I'll put you on the list. We'll even get you a free pass to come in. And it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at Weber Point in Stockton all next weekend. It is a lot of fun. But to move on to something a little bit more serious than just community outreach, I want to talk about the National Day of Reason, which is happening in Sacramento just a couple weeks from now, on the Capitol steps. I know a lot of you have probably heard of the National Day of Prayer, which also happens on the same day, Thursday, May 1st. And that's when a lot of people are going to get together and they're going to pray, and they're going to talk about how important prayer is. What we're going to do is we're going to get together on the Capitol steps here in California, up in Sacramento, and we're going to talk about how important reason is. It's an event that's sponsored by the California the Secular Coalition for California, and there's going to be some amazing speakers up there, myself included, and we're going to talk about why it's important to be a part of the secular movement, why it's important to take a role in politics. I know a lot of us like to shove that off, and we're apathetic about voting, we're apathetic about what issues are important, but it's time that we created or let our voice be heard, and so this is one way that you can do that. That's going to be in the evening on May 1st, and I want everybody to come up there and do it. Organize carpools or whatever you have to do. If you happen to have that day off, if you happen to have off on May 1st, I want you to talk to Rachel. Rachel, raise your hand. Rachel is coordinating our second big giant lobby day. If you talk to Rachel, she'll get your information, and we will book you with a couple other folks from our group, and you'll go out and actually talk for about 10 or 15 minutes to one of your elected officials about a couple issues that are important to secular Californians. Issues like health care, women's rights, children's rights, and all kinds of stuff related to education. And so please, if you have the opportunity, this is how you can get your voice heard literally in the door of our elected officials. And so Rachel in the purple, she'll help you with that. And then one other event that I'm always partial to is the Sacramento Freethought Day. It is many, many months away on October 11th, but just mark your calendars now. We're sending our speakers, booking our entertainment, and all kinds of stuff. It's going to be a really great event, and so I hope you guys can come out to that as well. Lots of other events. In Manteca, we're going to have Amy Jo Matthias. She's a professor and author at University of the Pacific. David Fitzgerald is an author as well in July. Greta Christina, the date is still to be determined, but she'll be coming to Manteca in August. And then from Portland, Oregon, Peter Boghossian is going to be coming out. He wrote the book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Thank you. And then David Noel from UC Merced is going to be here in November. So a lot of great speakers coming up. So again, Stockton Area Atheists and Freethinkers, StocktonAAF.org, and from the previous slide, the Stanislaus Humanists. If you guys are inclined to help support these kinds of events, we will take your donations. On top of that, and way more important than getting your donations again, is to just get to come out to these events. Now, is there anybody in the audience that happens to be a student here at CSU Stanislaus? Anybody at all? 1, 2, 3, was what? Does alumni count? Yes. Dan's shaking his head, yes. Alumni, then raise your hand too. Okay. We want to create a chapter of the Secular Student Alliance right here on campus. I think that would be an awesome thing to do. In fact,
America wants to create
that. Dan is with the Secular Student Alliance, and if you're interested in being a part of creating that group and having, monthly meetings or whatever for the students, for the alumni, to bring cool speakers onto campus, and again, to give a voice to the secular students that are here on campus, please talk to Dan, come and check out his table, put your name on his mailing list, and he will help bring those 5 or 6 of you together so that we can do what we need to create that group right here on campus. It will be a pretty awesome thing to do. We have one in Merced, we have one at University of the Pacific in Stockton, we have 4 of them up in Sacramento, and we want to get more and more going. My last announcement is to remind everybody about Camp Quest. That is the secular summer camp for children ages 8 to 17. There's 2 locations here in California. One is just north of Sacramento, and the other one is down just north of Riverside. And if you have kids between 8 and 17 and want them to experience a week outdoors in a scientific environment where they learn about humanism, and they learn about evolution, and they learn about the scientific method and peer review and critical thinking, while also having fun outside with archery and swimming and hiking and campfires and songs and all of that, then, and you were there, you remember last year, right? So ask me about Camp Quest. There's a couple brochures over there if you are inclined to volunteer for the week. And we would love to have some extra volunteers. Again, let me know about that too. And so I want to tell you about the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I know Dan is probably going to do this as well. But in 2009, we came to Turlock as a big giant group to try and convince the city council here to stop the sectarian prayers that were happening before all of their council meetings. And who was here that night when we, a couple of us, good. It was a tough night. We were up against a city council that was overwhelmingly Christian, that was overwhelmingly in support of saying Jesus in front of every single meeting at every opportunity. And we didn't win that night. We didn't get a moment of silence. We didn't get the sectarian prayers turned into just regular prayers, non-denominational prayers. We didn't get any of that stuff. In fact, it turns out now that behind the dais, behind the little lecterns and podiums at City Council, here in Turlock, it now says, "In God we trust," on top of letting preachers pray in the name of Jesus at their City Council meetings. But we tried. And we couldn't have tried as well as we did if it wasn't for the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They did an amazing job providing us with legal support, providing us with those threatening, angry letters that say we will possibly do something in the court about this. And it didn't work with Turlock. But it did work with Pismo Beach just recently, didn't it, in California? They were able to turn around the decision in Pismo Beach. In Lodi, where I'm from, they were able to at least get the rules to be a little bit better. And myself, I've delivered a couple of these invocations before the city council meeting, something that I would have never been able to do as an atheist prior to the decision, again, thanks to the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And so I want to encourage everybody here to be a watchdog, whether it's at school or at your workplace or in the city government, because if you see a violation or something that might possibly be a violation, please immediately talk to somebody from the Freedom from Religion Foundation or any of the leaders in the local groups and make your voice heard. We're done sitting down. We're done letting them take control of what should be a completely equal government. And so thank you, Dan, and your group for doing what you do. And so it is my pleasure to introduce Dan Barker. For those who don't know, Dan started off as a Christian preacher and a musician for 19 years. Well, he's still a musician, but he was a preacher for 19 years. He was ordained by the Standard Community Church in 1978 and is now the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. He actually spent quite a bit of time down in Southern California and graduated from Azusa Pacific, if that's correct. Yeah. And he's appeared on national radio, TV, Phil Donahue, Hannity, Maury Povich with Laurie in America. He's also appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, which, if you're Dan Barker, is a good place to meet women, isn't that right? He made his right there. He's the author of Losing Faith in Faith, Godless, and The Good Atheist, Living a Purpose-Filled Life. And most, if not all, of those books and some of his CDs are for sale in the back, which I hope you'll be kind enough to sign for us as well today. Please join me in welcoming Dan Barker.
So thank you, David.
Thank you.
Well, who's running the sound here? And thank you, Stockton AAF, is that what you call it?
That's right.
And Stanislaus Humanists. Good bunch of people, good bunch of non-believers. I'm sure most of you watch Fox and Friends on the Fox Network all the time. You may have seen, maybe if you pull a little closer to the audience, the feedback will be less good. Oh, it's not going to get close. Maybe I'll come back to it more. Now I feel like a professor. Okay, open your notebooks, open your books. So Annie Laurie Gaylor and I, we did meet on that Oprah Winfrey Show back in 1984. And that's the first time I actually ever spoke publicly about my atheism before anybody. 9 months earlier I was preaching, and then here I was, not only speaking for the first time about my atheism after 19 years of preaching, It was also the first time I'd ever spoken before a hostile audience, and I loved that. That was fun. Because Oprah had packed that audience with Bible thumpers. And it was on TV, it was another thing. And also, it was the first time I had actually knowingly talked with any other atheists. Of course, I've talked with atheists all through your life, but you just don't know it. It was the first time, and that's the day that I met Ann Gaylor and her daughter, Annie Laurie Gaylor, strong feminist atheist. And after a couple of minutes, we all relaxed and we said, we're among friends here, this is great. And it was like we were battling against those audience members. And Annie Laurie and I got married 3 years later. Today we are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We have a daughter, Sabrina, who's a senior in college now, and we showed her the videotape of the day we met on that Oprah show. And she was laughing. It was a couple years ago we showed it to her. Here's the day your mom and dad met. She was laughing, not because I had a lot of hair and I was younger, you know what I mean, but that audience was just really, you know, you can find it online. Go online and look for Oprah, Barker, Gaylor, or something. You can find that videotape from the 1980s with all the clothing style and music. But Annie Laurie, mother, started the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They started in the 70s. 1978 went national, a group to keep state and church separate. And we have a lot of cases in the courts. I'll talk about Pismo Beach real fast. But Annie Laurie was on Fox and Friends yesterday morning. I think they should call it Fox and Enemies because it was her against the world. Talking about two things. One is that we put up a big display in Daly Plaza in Chicago this week. Three of our attorneys drove down there and set up a huge 12-foot tall, and the reason we did it 12 feet is because it's answering a big Catholic display about Easter that's there with a big cross there as well, in public property. And we told the media, we don't think our display should be on public property and in public square, but if the religious people are going to be there, then we want to answer it. So they were picking on Annie Laurie yesterday morning. What about manners? What about this is the holy week for Christians, and you have the gall to go and criticize Christians during this most holy week of theirs? And also yesterday, one of our attorneys, Patrick Elliott, was on national TV talking about our complaint over the Clemson University football coach. Have you heard about that? Dabo, what's his name? Swinney, I think is his name. Who's really proselytizing, praying with students, baptisms at the school, Bible verses. He drives into churches and all that. So we made a complaint. And boy, I got to tell you, it's bad criticizing religion, but religion in sports. Our phones really ring. We get the most ugly phone calls when it's mixed with sports, you know. I guess they're so insecure about their team that they need God on their side, you know, to win the game or something. But Patrick Elliott was on national TV. We do an awful lot of complaints and issues trying to keep religion and government separate. And we've hired our 5th full-time attorney last fall. His name is Sam. And he just passed the bar in Wisconsin. He had to pass the bar in 3 states, and then he passed it in Wisconsin and was just sworn in a couple weeks ago. And our building is so crowded and so tiny that we're expanding now. And we have a big 4-story expansion going up next to us. And then we're going to add a 3rd floor to our existing building. And the attorneys are salivating because you should see their offices right now. It's impossible. Andrew's got this little desk in a little corner and stuff's all over the floor. I mean, it's just, but they love their job. They love having a job where they work for constitutional issues with really interesting people in that. So they're looking out the windows at their future offices that we promised to them. Plus, we're going to hire a legal secretary so we can get a lot more work done. Last year, more than 2,500 complaints came into our office from people like you. You see something going on, like Turlock or whatever. We sent out way more than 1,000 official letters, and often the complaint is settled with just a letter. We don't even have to go to court. So that's nice. Our goal is to try to stop these abuses just by reminding public officials of what the law is. Sometimes, though, they dig in their heels and they say, well, sue us, like Pismo Beach. In Pismo Beach, they have had, up until last week, a full-time chaplain who would open every meeting of the Pismo Beach City Council members with not just a prayer. He would turn the podium around and he would first preach to the audience. He's a Foursquare gospel preacher. You know what that is, Foursquare? Pentecostal type. And then his sermon would be like directed at everybody there. We need to bow to Jesus, and we can't get any city work done without God's blessing. It's very, very strong Christian proselytizing, not some vague kind of prayer to the powers that be, but very strong. We complained, and they ignored it. Members of ours who lived in the city complained, and they ignored it. An atheist woman and a Jewish woman both complained in the city, and they just ignored it. So what? We're going to do what we want to do, right? And so we made an official complaint, and nothing. They just completely ignored it. Like, just ignore them, they'll go away. Well, we didn't go away. We filed suit in state court this time. We used to go into federal court, but here we decided to sue in state court because there's a case in federal court right now in Greece, New York, which we're not sure about the outcome is going to be about prayer. And it's one of our members in that case, too. Linda Stevens is one of the plaintiffs in that Supreme Court case, which just had oral arguments recently. So we sued in state court, which is pretty strong in California, about religion and government. And after we sued, the city realized, and their attorney realized, they mean business, and we're not going to win this thing. So we just reached a settlement last Tuesday night, which is a victory. They agreed to get rid of the chaplaincy, to stop having the prayers. They're agreeing that what they did is wrong, and they're going to pay our legal costs, which is kind of nice. When you're a nonprofit, it's nice for them to pay our attorneys, right? So we can announce it now. We knew the victory was coming, but it was last Tuesday night when the city council in closed session decided that they would settle the lawsuit. So we stopped prayer in Pismo Beach. Maybe we can use that as a precedent. And we can use that as a stepping stone, as a precedent for other cities that are still renegades, really. They're violating the law, and they know they're violating the law, and they're going to keep doing it because what's the penalty? There's a good political advantage to breaking the law because the voters want to see you standing up for God and for Jesus and the Bible. The voters like that. The voters like it when you resist the Freedom from Religion Foundation and the ACLU. And so it's a win-win for them to fight us, except it's costly. And in many cases, and we don't care if a public official like a mayor, like in Ohio, we just had a victory last year about a Jesus painting in a high school. The principal said, that painting is not coming down without a court order. So we sued, and then the superintendent of the schools and the principal had to say, well, we don't think it should come down, but think of the cost. You know, we're really strapped for money. Do we want to spend our time fighting this risky lawsuit that we might lose? So that was a face saver for them. They could still say, we think Jesus is right and the Bible is real, but we don't want to waste any more taxpayer money in this lawsuit, which is something in our favor. It's something you can bring up when you complain. That you really want to fight this thing and think about how much it costs. And then not only are you paying your own attorneys, but you're going to have to usually pay for our attorneys as well, usually through a lawsuit or through a settlement. So we have about 12 or 14 lawsuits in the courts right now, including one really good victory we just had in federal court. We're suing the IRS. We have 3 lawsuits against the IRS right now. And if you know Annie Laurie, nothing gives her more joy in life than suing the government. I mean, it's just like, you talk about let's sue the bastard. Well, we can, and we do. And so it's like, she just loves the thought that they're getting served these papers that they're being sued, for breaking the law. And they're breaking the law. That's what they're doing. They're thumbing their nose at our Constitution. So our 3 cases against the IRS in federal court are over politicking from the pulpit, over the 990 form, which is accountability. The churches don't have to be accountable while all of their nonprofits do. And my favorite is the one we just won last fall, which is being appealed. The Obama administration is appealing their loss, was the housing allowance, which is, you may not know this, but in the tax codes, paragraph 107, 1 and 2, says any minister of the gospel doesn't have to report their housing as income. Can you imagine that? You just did your taxes last week, some of you, right? Wouldn't you love to be able to just subtract all of your house payments or rent as income, just deduct it? Wouldn't you love to do that? Well, every minister in the country gets to do that. Did you know that? They don't have to pay taxes on their housing. And so that drastically lowers their liability, which means it raises yours and mine. And it's a long story about, we started in California and we pulled out of California because of the Wynn decision in Arizona on standing. We realized we couldn't sue as taxpayers. We had to show direct injury. So what we did was, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which like a church is a 501c3 nonprofit, the Freedom from Religion Foundation designated for me and Annie Laurie a housing allowance. Didn't change our salary, it was just on paper, part of our salary is a housing allowance that we don't get to take. And I argued to the court that when I was a minister working for a 501c3 nonprofit, religious group, church, that was promoting the concept of God, I got this great tax break. But now that I'm working for a nonprofit organization that is challenging the concept of God, I don't get that break. So there's a discrimination there. And the judge agreed. We have standing to sue. We've been injured. So we won in federal court there, and then we're going to Chicago to appeals court. Either way, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. If we win or lose in Chicago, one of us is going to appeal to the Supreme Court. Either way, and it's important. In fact, we know it's important because we've heard now that there's a move by a member of Congress to change the IRS code to apply to all nonprofits, not just churches, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? It's showing that they're nervous. They think they're going to lose this thing. I don't know how that would work, but apparently the U.S. government, when they were briefing in our case, you may not believe this, it was weird, an argument, but they actually argued, and the judge laughed this argument out, but the U.S. government argued that Annie Laurie and I don't have standing to sue the government over this violation by the IRS because we don't know that we would not be considered ministers of the gospel ourselves and qualify for that tax break. Can you follow that? In other words, I'm going to have to withhold that and get penalized by the IRS first to show the injury, then I can go into court, right? And the judge laughed and said, this is really dumb. Especially, I used to be an ordained minister, but Annie Laurie, a third-generation atheist working for a nonprofit, Freedom from Religion, she's a minister of the gospel? The government actually made that argument. They didn't say that they knew for sure. They just said that we haven't proved injury because we haven't shown that the IRS would not consider that. So I know that's going to be raised in Chicago. We know they're going to try to find some way to knock us out on stand. So I could talk for hours about that, but I came to talk about my story mainly. And it's a lot more fun doing this work than it was preaching, I've got to tell you. How many of you are going to get up tomorrow morning for Easter sunrise services for the Lord? You are? Okay. How many of you are going to take the day of rest seriously and sleep in? Right? So I used to have to get up how many Easters as a minister, and preach the resurrection of Jesus. And by the way, the resurrection of Jesus, Paul said, is the most important part of the whole gospel, the whole message. Because if Christ was not risen, our faith is in vain, the Bible says. And if you follow the FFRF Facebook page, which has, I think there's 200 and some thousand, what do they call it on that? Followers on Facebook?
Likes.
Likes? Is that what it is? Okay. I issued an Easter challenge this week. And the Easter challenge basically is not to prove the resurrection, but just tell the story. I issued that challenge in 1992, and only 2 people have tried it, and they didn't even come close to following the terms of it. To basically take the gospel accounts and 1 Corinthians 15 and a little bit in Acts that talk about the resurrection, put them together into one coherent story, don't omit any details, and just tell the story. No one's been able to do that. The story is too contradictory. It's too discrepant. Even conservative scholars agree that you can't put it together into a coherent tale. And yet, believers are going to get up tomorrow and worship this supposed historic event, the resurrection of Jesus. I used to preach that. When I was young, I became a born-again Christian. I used to preach and believe that God doesn't have any grandchildren, that every believer has to become their own believer. You're not a Christian just because you're in a Christian family. And that's kind of what Richard Dawkins is saying. You can't say that's a Catholic child, that's a Muslim child. That is a child in a Catholic family, a child in a Muslim family. And I felt the same way. Each of us had to become our own child of God. And I did. I confessed my sins. I thought I was a sinner. I believed the Bible. It said the only hope is for me to accept the death of Jesus on the cross and in payment for my sin, and his resurrection as a promise of eternal life. And I was a born-again Christian, and it felt great. I felt, wow, how lucky am I? I was born in the right family, in the right religion, in the right country, in the right time of history, because Jesus is coming soon, And I get to be in the front line of the army for Jesus, you know, I get to witness all of this happening. And I was 15 years old, I remember, listening to a sermon about going to the whole world and preach the gospel. And I thought, you know, Jesus might come tonight or tomorrow or next week. And I didn't think I was going to live long enough to go to college or to get married or any of that. I thought the world's going to end like a thief in the night. And of course, every generation of Christians has thought that. There have been a group in every generation of Christians. Even in the first century, Jesus told the disciples, some of you will not taste death until you see me. And Paul said it would be soon. Even so, Lord, come quickly. And then, of course, you know, like in the 1830s, it was the Millerites that sold everything and went up on a hill and waited for the world. In 1914, it was the Jehovah's Witnesses. Oops, it was 1925. They goofed. Charles Russell goofed, and so James Rutherford came along. And then again, oops. In 1975, was that the next one?
Yeah.
And had they made any since then?
Now they just have it
Somewhere.
we don't even know what to do right
Well, except in 1914 or 25, they said that he actually did come spiritually.
Right.
The kingdom came spiritually, you know. So, but anyway, I thought the world was going to come any minute. It could be tonight, and it was a very effective soul-winning technique to go up to people and ask them, you know, if you were to die right now, would you go to heaven or hell? If Jesus were to come tonight, would you be ready? And I got to tell you, that motivated me when I thought about that. Some of you probably don't know what the heck I'm talking about, but if you're a person of faith, those things are really not just important, but even scary. Like, wow, there is a heaven and there is a hell. And so I accepted what I was convinced was the call to the ministry. And I thought, you know, I'm not going to wait till I graduate from seminary and get a degree. I'm going to start preaching now. And so I was a high school preacher with a Bible under my arm. I was that guy on campus. You know what I mean? You know who that guy is on campus? And then later in college, the same thing. I was preaching and I was proud of it. In fact, I went up to my Spanish teacher and told him about Jesus, and he became a born-again Christian. And we started doing kind of secret Bible studies on Anaheim High School campus there. And even years after, when I would come back, they still had that group going. So I thought what I had was beautiful and wonderful. And I thought, this is special. This is real. This is love. This is God's love. For so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And I thought, who could possibly not want this? I didn't see myself as the troublemaking, right-wing Christian jerk on campus. I saw myself as this wonderful message. And as soon as you saw me and heard and you would feel the love, you would want to be part of it too. Why wouldn't you? And what's wrong with you skeptics? That you would not want something that wonderful, you know? So in the foreword to my book, Godless, Richard Dawkins writes, Dan Barker was not just a preacher. He was the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. And that really is true. I was just so confident. I was so sure of myself. And I had the Word of God, and I had the gospel, and I had, you know, all of this, and the growth of the church, and the fulfilled prophecies, and the miracles, and all of this truth, you know. I used to work for a while when I was in high school as the choir librarian for Catherine Pullman, the faith healer, who once a month would come to the Shrine Auditorium down in Los Angeles and have these big faith healing meetings. And so I sat right in the front row of the choir, just a few feet from her, out on the stage, and watching all these miracles. People coming up in wheelchairs and crutches, and I sometimes had to move my feet because these people were getting slain in the Spirit. You know what that is, slain in the Spirit? Where you kind of fall back, I'm speaking in tongues and all that. And I thought, wow, who could possibly deny the power of God? Who could possibly say that this isn't real? It's real. I felt it. I got goosebumps. I got this feeling of peace and joy, and I would want to just sing. And I now realize, I'm not going to say I was nutty, but I now realize that all of us fall somewhere on this bell curve of what we might call a susceptibility to mysticism. And some of you probably went to church, and you sat there, and you looked around, and you wondered, what the heck's everybody feeling, right? Others of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You went to church, you were in the service, and you felt it, and you believed it, and it was like this presence in your mind, and this peace, and this amazing. It's an amazing thing that happens. In fact, I can still do it as an atheist. I won't do it tonight, but I can still go outside if there's nobody listening. I can speak in tongues again, and then I get those feelings. It's a kind of an amazing thing that happens in the brain to some of us. If you happen to fall over here on the bell curve, I was here at this edge, just this side of hearing voices. You know what I mean? And I think I still am, just as the kind of person that I am. I think I still am. And now I express it through jazz piano. I can find another way to do that, you know. But some of you are over here on the bell curve, and you think that we're making it up. Some of you probably think that religious experience is a phony thing. It's not phony. It's a real thing, and it happens in most religions. I debated a Hindu Vedic astrologer last fall in Toronto, the first Hindu I ever debated publicly. And he stood up there and he said, you know, the strong evidence for the existence of Shiva is that Shiva talks to my heart. I have met Shiva personally. And so you can't tell me what I feel is real, isn't real, because you have not experienced it. Who are you to tell me that? That's the same argument that the Christians make, isn't it? It's the same argument that anybody makes, that if they say they have a personal relationship with God, I don't deny that they have that experience. They are having a very real, a very powerful experience. I had it and I can still have it. But the question is whether that experience points to anything outside of the mind. That's the question. It's real, it's powerful, it motivates a lot of people. But is it actually pointing to anything? You can ask the same question about a nightmare. You wake up in the middle of the night, your heart's pounding, you sit up in bed, you're screaming, your hands are sweating. You've had a powerful experience of a frightening experience. No one can deny that you had a real experience, but there's no monster crawling through the window. In reality, it's all in your mind. And so the human mind is very powerful, and I was wrapped up in that whole thing, and it was beautiful. I liked it. I thought it was great. I thought it confirmed. Once in a while, I would lay hands on people and pray. I remember Gary. In fact, Gary just died last year. I saw him here in Riverbank. Gary and Glenn are two old preacher friends of mine. And Gary had lost his voice. We were in Mexico City. I was down in Mexico preaching as a missionary for about 2 years, trying to convert Catholics into Christians, you know what I mean? And it worked. We were in Mexico City with our quartet, and we were singing, you know, God, and we would rotate. We would preach different nights. So I would preach some nights, and then Steve, and then Ralph, and then Gary would preach different nights, and there were other people on the team. So before the meeting, we usually met to have like a prayer time before, you know, kind of like a football huddle before you go out in the field. And so we would pray, dear Jesus, bless the ministry and bring souls into the kingdom, and we want to glorify your name, all that stuff. And then Gary said, hey guys, I can't talk, I can't preach, I'm my voice, I can't talk tonight, I can't preach. Well, it was his turn to preach. So I thought, well, okay, God says he will answer prayer. So I laid my hands on Gary's shoulder, and I said, Gary, I said, dear God, you brought Gary down here to preach, so heal his voice. And I said, Gary, in the name of Jesus, be healed. And Gary said, praise the Lord. His voice actually came back. Now, how do you explain that, you skeptics? That actually happened. You know, and it's the confirmation bias, because a whole bunch of other times I prayed, nothing happened, right? In fact, there were times when I prayed when something, and even the person went home and died, you know, but you don't count that. You don't count those. What you do is you count the hits and you ignore the misses, right? So that actually happened, and I got to tell you, when you're a person of faith and something like that happens, it's very affirming, right? No one was going to possibly tell me that God wasn't real. I saw a miracle. Of course, I now know that it's irresponsible until you've ruled out every possible or plausible naturalistic explanation to just jump to a supernatural conclusion. I now know that. I can't go back and repeat it. But a couple of years ago, I told the story, and a woman in the audience, she was either a doctor or a PhD, doctoral student. She said, well, you know what that sounds like? There's this thing called a laryngeal spasm. When people are tired or nervous, their larynx will kind of freeze up on them, and they need to relax. They need to, you know, and take some breaths, and that can. So that's possible that that's what happened. It's possible that Gary was just tired. We'd been driving for days, and so when I said that to him, combined with his faith and all that, and he overcame. So maybe that's not what happened. But don't you think that natural explanation is probably more plausible than a supernatural explanation? Don't you think? Anyway. I'm telling you the story to show you that I really felt like it was true. I was not a fake. I was not a phony. I was not like in it for the money. We were broke most of the time because I thought the world was ending. Who needs money? Jesus might come tonight. And some people try to say, well, Dan, you weren't a true Christian, because if you were a true Christian, you never would have left. True Christians know, and they just don't read. But I make a case, and you can read it in Godless or Losing Faith in Faith, that if I was not a true Christian, then nobody is. Doesn't the Bible say, you shall know them by their fruits? Doesn't matter what somebody says, you shall know them by their fruits. And my life exhibited all of the fruits of the Spirit, faith and love and all that stuff. You know, I was sincere. I used to think that all Christian ministers were sincere because I was. I've since learned that's not the case. Annie Laurie is a lot more cynical than I am. She thinks most of them are not sincere. But I know some of them are. I mean, they're not all phonies, right? So, and they're not all out abusing children and you know, stealing from the collection plate. Some of them really are good people who are sincere. Like me, I thought it was true. So I went to college. I was a Christian songwriter. I got a degree in religion from Azusa Pacific University. It was a college at the time. Now they call it Azusa Pacific University. And on campus, I was involved in Christian ministries. I then became an associate pastor of 3 different churches in California. And the first one was a Friends church, if you know what that is. The California Friends are like the West Coast version of the Quakers. Richard Nixon came out of the California Friends tradition. A little more evangelical than the more traditional Quakers, but still sort of de-emphasizing the sacraments and all that. But my family was charismatic, and I was called. It's interesting how God always called me where I wanted to go. Isn't that interesting? I was called to an Assembly of God church, which was more in line with my charismatic speaking in tongues kind of stuff, where there was a living ministry. It wasn't just sitting and reading the Bible and talking, you know, it was a living in the presence of God himself. So I was in, it was called the Glen Grove Assembly down in Southern California for about a year and a half. And I'm glad I was in that church for a while as an associate pastor. I quickly found them to be way too noisy for my tastes, if you know what I mean. Have you ever been to Pentecostal churches where they're screaming and their hands in the air and they're falling down and you see some of these women on the ground shaking like this in love with Jesus? I've read some psychologists suggest that there's more going on with these women than, well, I'm not going to go there, but they're in love with their Jesus boyfriend and singing and all of that, and they were sincere people. They were sweet people. I think they were honest, and they were there to worship. You know, that's the kind of people they were, the kind of church they liked. But then I got called to a church up here in Central California, a little mining town called Standard, outside of Sonora. Does somebody know where that is? It's not too far from here. It's just up the hills. And I was there for a year and a half, and then that church sent me out as an evangelist, because I always thought my calling was evangelism. It wasn't local home church. I wanted to win souls. So that was my home base for a while, where I would then travel the country. For 8 years I traveled the country preaching the gospel, thinking any minute now, Jesus is going to come again. And please, Jesus, wait for one more day so we can preach one more sermon and bring one more soul into the kingdom of heaven. I really believed that. We put all our stuff in storage. I was married. I met Carol in college. And we were having children by then. And so we had no health insurance, no contracts. We didn't charge. We would just go to a church and hope that they might take up a love offering. You know what that is? It's called living by faith. I thought it was great at the time to live by faith, and I now realize how irresponsible that was, especially with little kids, to be living like that. And so sometimes we would open the envelope out in the car to see if there was enough cash to get to the next church. It was that kind of a thing. But I didn't care. Here I was in my early 20s. Jesus is coming any minute now, and the world's going to end, and it doesn't matter who lays up wealth on this world, you know? That take no thought for the morrow, the Bible says, for the morrow will take thought of the things of itself. When we were in Ohio during one of those big tours, a whole week of meetings fell through. And so I went down to the basement of the pastor's home where we were staying at for that week. We couldn't leave because I had further engagements further on east of there. I went down to the basement where they had a piano and I wrote a little musical, thinking when we get back to Standard, up here to Sonora, I'll come back here and we'll have a little Christmas musical that the kids can do. It'll be really cute. And so I thought, well, it can be from the point of view of the animals. Because kids like animals, so instead of the Christmas story, you know, from adults, what did the animals say? So I wrote a little musical about the Christmas story, and I called it And don't laugh when you hear this title, because there's really a deep spiritual significance to this. The musical was called Mary Had a Little Lamb. Why did you laugh? If you have spiritual vision, you would understand. Mary's the mother of Jesus, right? Jesus is the Lamb of God. Get it? Mary had a little lamb. And it was all about, the donkeys and the animals and this rooster and all these different, characters that were there for the birth of Jesus. And I came back to California then, and I was involved in record production too. I was doing some Christian record production for Manuel Bonilla. If some of you know his name. He was, and I think he still is, the leading Spanish-speaking Christian recording artist in the world. He's huge. And since I knew both languages, I was able to work in the studios with him and produce a lot of his early children's albums. So a woman knew about me, and she was doing some work, and she said, she asked me to do some transcriptions. So I showed her my musical. And she said, hey, there's a Christian publisher looking for a Christmas musical. Go show it to them. Man of Music down in Burbank, they were at the time. So I called them up, and they said, yeah, let's look at it. So I drove to Man of Music and walked in with my handwritten manuscript, And I wasn't thinking about publication. I was just thinking this will be cool to do in our church. And I sat down at the piano there, kind of nervous, because these are, music publishers. And so Carl Ferrer, in fact, Carl is still alive, and we're still good friends. I see him once in a while. He's in Austin now. He said, let's see what you got. So I started playing the introduction to the first song. And he grabbed my hand. Stop. What? I can tell you right now, we're going to publish this, and it's going to be one of our bestsellers. And I said, but you haven't heard anything. And he said, I've heard enough, and I've seen enough. I've been in this business. This is going to be good. So play the rest of it. So I did, and they did, and they didn't change a thing, and they published it. And it was one of their best. It was their bestseller for like 3 years. And it's still selling. In fact, I'm still getting royalties. Every year I get a check from Nana's agency that comes back to me again. And I have trouble deciding what to do with the money. So I usually, just for the ethical reasons, I usually just give it to charity. So it's not like, you know what I mean, I'm taking Christian music, Christian money to give to atheists. Although some of you probably like to do that, which is not true. But it became like a bestseller for them. They were like the #3 publisher at the time of Christian music. And so then suddenly I was a Christian composer. I was a Christian songwriter, and I was still preaching the gospel. My kids were getting a little older, and I was getting invited, not so much to preach as much, but to be the guy, the composer that wrote the musical that all these churches and schools did. And that was kind of cool. It was like a status thing. Wow. So instead of a full sermon, I would sit at the piano, do some of my songs, and then preach sermonettes. And it was a little more of that kind of a change to my ministry. Still thinking the world was going to end in a minute. They liked that musical so much, they said, can you write a follow-up? Can you do can we have a sequel? And I thought, well, okay. Maybe then the children or grandchildren of those animals at the Christmas story could be telling the Easter story. So I wrote a musical, and guess what the title of that was? You can't guess? If you had spiritual understanding, you would find the title immediately. His fleece was white as snow. Why do you laugh? The fleece. See, Jesus was the final Passover sacrifice. You had to sacrifice the clean animal that was unblemished, representing sin. And of course, Jesus had no sin. So he was that final sacrificial lamb, and his fleece was white as snow. Get it? Mm-hmm. And I had all the stuff in there about the fulfillment of prophecies and all of that in Jerusalem. And again, it was all the animals, and I actually killed off the main character. And see, this is a musical for children. But the churches loved it, and Christian schools loved it. And I still sometimes get these big manila envelopes of letters from kids. Reverend Barker, God bless you, and I never answer them. Should I answer them? Or, I don't know. But the lead character is Snowy, a little man named Snowy, who greets the news with mixed feelings that he has been specially chosen as the Passover lamb. What an honor! So the whole story is that. So anyway, it's really silly. I mean, the lyrics, I'm embarrassed. The music's pretty good, actually. I wish I could take that music and rewrite the words, but the music, I'm proud of it as a craftsman, you know what I mean? In fact, there have been atheists and agnostics who write some really good religious music, believe it or not. But doing it as a craft. So anyway, my ministry started changing. So instead of traveling around preaching hellfire and damnation and the end of the world, and you should get ready if you die tonight, what would happen? My ministry started to soften a little bit. I started to grow up a little bit. I started to get into my 30s, and the kids were getting a little older. Jesus had not come again, darn it. He hasn't come yet, like I thought, and it started to dawn on me, maybe it won't be tonight. Maybe it won't be like we think it's going to be any minute right now. And another very interesting thing that started to happen to me was, okay, I'm an atheist now, right? And I was a strong fundamentalist Bible-believing believer at the beginning. And at that point, when I wrote the musicals, you don't just, if you were like me, you don't just wake up one morning as a strong fundamentalist believer and then just go, oh, silly me, there's no God, ha, 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 ha. How could I have been so stupid? You can't do that in one leap. It's impossible. I've heard stories of people whose faiths kind of did that, maybe some in this room, but the way I was raised, it was impossible. You can't just change your whole brain like that in just a minute. But what happened was, and this was kind of good, most of my migration, it took 4 or 5 years to start as a fundamentalist, to move gradually to become an atheist. And most of that happened within Christianity, meaning that most of the work that discredits Christianity has been done by Christians, not outside skeptic scholars. Most of the questions are being raised, and to prove that, you can put the different Christian groups across a continuum. I realize there is no one Christianity. There's a bunch of Christianities, from these, like me over here, Bible-believing evangelical fundamentalists, to more moderate, to more liberal types, and there's probably as many Christianities as there are Christians. Each one finds the Bible where they fit in. The loud, speaking in tongue, emotional Pentecostals are going to gravitate to the Assembly of God churches, right? They're not going to be happy in some Episcopal church where you're doing sacraments. They're not going to like that. But the more intellectual type of thinkers, the way they are going to find in the Bible their type of faith, and they're going to find a church that meets their own particular needs. So I was getting invited, not just by fundamental churches, I was getting invited by a whole cross-section of Christian churches. And I was being introduced to a broader cross-section of Christianity than I was comfortable with. That was the beginning for me. I didn't think I was going to end up an atheist. I just thought, oh, I'm maturing in my faith. I met other Christians that had a different view from me, and I thought, oh, of course, God wants me to grow, and I'm growing now. I'm learning to be more sophisticated, a little more subtle, a little less hellfire and damnation. And my ministry over those few years started to migrate as well. I started preaching less about hell and more about love, you know what I mean? Less about the afterlife and more about how do we live this life, which is kind of what is standard Sunday morning fare in most churches these days. How do you let your light shine before men? And realizing, well, okay, maybe preaching the end of the world is important, but not as important as living our daily lives for Christ and all that. And I remember once, and I have to make a very long story very short, but I remember early in that process, I was invited to a Baptist church, Southern California. It was in Southern California. And beforehand, the minister, and we still meet before the meeting to pray, like, dear God, bless Reverend Barker's ministry tonight as he's come to, share with us the gospel and whatever. And for some reason, the pastor told me, he said, we have some people in our church who have slightly different interpretations of the Bible than I do. He said, for example, there are some people in this church who don't think Adam and Eve were historical people. And I thought, what? And you let them be members? What? That's heresy. They're questioning the Word of God. And this minister said, don't get me wrong. I think Adam and Eve were real. They were real people. But these people in my congregation think that just like Jesus told the parables, you know what a parable is? Like the parable of the prodigal son. Jesus told a parable to illustrate an important spiritual or moral lesson. But nobody thinks there actually was a prodigal son. And it didn't matter if there was or wasn't a historical prodigal son with an address and social security number. There's not even a name. It's the prodigal son, right? So if Jesus can make up stories, you wouldn't call that a lie, would you? He's making up a story to illustrate an important lesson. The story, the historicity of the story is not important, it's the story itself that's important. So these people in my congregation, he said, think that the ancient Israelites, the early Jews, did the same thing with Adam and Eve's story. It wasn't supposed to be true. Nobody even thought it was actually true. It was the story of these two people. I thought that was heretical. I thought that was horrible. I thought that was like a total threat to faith and the reliability of the Bible, that people would think like that. And to his credit, this minister didn't think like that either. He was telling me what these people thought. And I remember thinking, boy, this is weird. And they call themselves Christians, that they would question the actual truth of the Bible and the actual talking snake and the tree with the magic fruit on it, all that stuff, which is true, because the Bible says it's true. So, and he said, these people tried to explain that there couldn't have been an Adam and Eve because of what we know about evolution. There couldn't have been a first man and a first woman. And also we know that the human race came out of Africa, not out of the Middle East. So the story had to be more of a metaphor than actual truth. And I was really shocked. I thought, this is not, no. How can they be Christians? But I remember what happened in my mind. I didn't jettison Adam and Eve. I didn't say, oh, okay, Adam and Eve were not real. What happened in my mind way back there was to say, those people are wrong, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't fellowship with them. They're good people, they're church-going people, they pray to the same God I do, and should this issue be such a big deal that it would separate us? Historically, issues like that were a big deal. John Calvin had his friend, supposed friend, Michael Servetus, burnt at the stake over a simple little difference in the nature of Jesus and the nature of the Trinity. They were big deals. It wasn't just Catholics killing Protestants, it was Protestants killing other Protestants over a tiny, in fact, in Servetus' case, it was the misplacement of a preposition, basically. John Calvin said, Jesus is the eternal Son of God. And Servetus said, no, Jesus is the Son of the eternal God. Do you get it? That got him killed. That got him murdered by John Calvin, who could have stopped it. But he couldn't allow the heresy, the blasphemy, which he later said was heresy, which meant that thou shalt not contradict John Calvin, but it was. So I remember thinking, okay, these people have different views and it's heretical. What they believe is wrong, but I'm still going to call them brothers and sisters in Christ. We can still be Christians, right? And that started in my mind, I didn't jump to atheism. I was sort of softening, a little more sophisticating, growing up kind of subtle idea of Christianity that was a little more liberal. You know what I mean? A little less hard-nosed, fundamentalist, hellfire. I was on a Phil Donahue show in the late 80s where there was one of these hellfire preachers. Smock was his name. You know Judge Smock, that guy. He was on all the campuses. And so something in my brain in my early 30s started thinking, well, let's think about these things. The world's not ending. Jesus hasn't come yet. And wait a minute, there's questions, there's differences, and let me find out what's true. And I remember suddenly just getting this horrible hunger to learn something, which was kind of amazing. I think if I'd gone to a regular liberal arts college like I should have, instead of Azusa Pacific, where we were limited to, at that time anyway, to the one way of thinking, it might have happened earlier. And maybe also the fact the frontal lobe takes a while to develop. That frontal lobe is the last thing to evolve and the last thing to finish developing in the human species. The frontal lobe, which is the part that gives you that social kind of moral restraint. And a lot of scientists, like Sapolsky, say it happens later with guys than with women, which might explain a lot. Might explain why it's hard to draft young men over the age of 26 or so. There's something about that control thing that happened. And I remember almost feeling different in my brain, this hunger to learn and to read and to know and to broaden and to suddenly, wow, things are not exactly black and white like they used to be. And I think fundamentalists have this attitude, you might call it binary brains, where Jesus said, if you have to be cold or hot in Revelation, because if you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth. He said, he that is not with me is against me. There's a sort of small-town cult mentality that these cult leaders have, that you've got to be everything or nothing. You can't have any in-between gray area. Well, then I was meeting Christians that did have gray area. And that was different. And so as a fundamentalist, that got me into thinking and moving and I guess we're out of time, so I can't tell the whole thing, but basically I swung clear across that continuum after 4 or 5 years, 1983, and I realized, well, wait a minute, if the prodigal son is a parable, and if Adam and Eve are a metaphor, then maybe this other character, Yahweh, God, is also just one big figure of speech. Doesn't matter if he exists or not, and the writers didn't actually really care. It was the important lesson. The Bible is just a metaphor for existence and morality and all that. And I became in my own mind this like, suddenly, whoa, maybe none of it's true. And then suddenly you start seeing the Bible differently. And I started seeing the discrepancies and the historical and the scientific mistakes. And I hated that because I loved it so much and I thought it was so true. But I decided I got to make a choice here. Do I want God or do I want truth? Because you can't have both. You really can't have both. If you're going to follow truth, then God has to be an option. If you're going to follow truth, God can't be a given. If you're going to follow truth, God has to be an option. So then what? Is God true or not? And in my own mind, finally I got to this point where it was the summer of '83. I was down in Mexico in a church, Adobe church with no glass in the windows, and looking up at the stars. I remember sleeping on this little cot, like a burlap cot. And for the first time in my life, I realized, as I was looking out the window at the stars, I realized, whoa, I'm totally alone in this room. It's just me. There's not some big eyeball or some spook or some holy principality judging me. I'm just a biological organism in a natural environment. That's who I really, really am. I'm an animal. That's who I am. And the pretense all stripped away. And I looked up at the stars and I realized, just like those stars are ingesting energy and burning for a while and then burning out, I'm kind of this low wattage star that's kind of glowing faintly and eating and burning, but it's going to burn out someday. And that's it. This is who I really am. And at the same time, it was scary and exciting to realize that. It was almost like, hi, Dan, that's who you really are. This is who you are. Stop pretending. There's not principalities and powers struggling over your eternal destiny. It's just you in the world. And that was scary and fun at the same time. It's kind of like, maybe like skydiving or mountain climbing or something where you're like, oh, should I be doing this, after all these years? I didn't immediately tell everybody for about 4 or 5 months. I was a hypocrite, I have to admit, which was kind of good. And I know a lot of members of the Clergy Project. There's almost 600 now in the Clergy Project who are former clergy or active clergy who have lost their faith. Will say a similar thing. How do you stop a lifetime of ministry? How do you just stop on a dime? I should have stopped right then because I no longer believe. I didn't know any other atheists, or didn't know that I did. I didn't know if I even liked the word atheist. I didn't know what that even meant. I just knew that I couldn't believe that stuff anymore. And it probably sounds abrupt, but in the book I explain more how I got up to that point. And so for about 4 months or more, I still had some engagements to preach on the weekends, but I was going into computer programming. But I was still inviting, and the last time I preached was right here in Auburn, right up north of here. They had flown me up to San Jose, and some other church took me to Auburn, and they were going to fly me home. I forget what it was. And before the meeting, we were meeting like usual with the staff. It was meeting in a high school in Auburn, California. This church that probably built their own building later, but and dear God bless Reverend Barker's ministry, and it was Christmas. It was December. So I was going to do more kind of holiday Christmas music and sermons about, the birth of Jesus. And they said, especially we want you to bless Barker's ministry tonight because Harry is coming to church tonight. We want you to touch Harry's heart. So they told me that Harry was the town atheist. And Harry had just gotten remarried to a young woman who became born again. And she said, why don't you come to church with me tonight? It's going to be, you like music, right? This guy's coming from Southern California. He's a songwriter. And and so Harry said, okay, I'll go to church. He loved his wife. Sure, I'll go to church with you. So she must have got on the phone or something. He's coming to church. He's coming. So the whole church was buzzing like, Harry's coming to church. And they said, Harry is a great guy. He's a well-respected businessman in town. Everybody loves him. He'd give you the shirt off his back. Harry is really, but he's not saved. He's not a Christian. But he's coming tonight. And so this is going to be our chance to convert Harry to Christianity. And I'm thinking, oh, I shouldn't be here. This is not right. I actually had never met another atheist, knowingly, and I kind of was like, wow, another atheist, a person who's come to the same conclusion. So I went up on the stage. It was at the high school, and there was the lights were on me, and there was a piano, so I would play some songs, and then I would preach a little, and I'd play some more songs. And all I could think about is there's a guy named Harry out in the audience who's an atheist, who must be thinking what I'm doing is really stupid, because it was. I was playing these songs with these really dumb lyrics that I had written, and I was going, oh, this is but what was I almost felt like stopping and saying, I'm sorry, this is crap. Harry, whoever you are, Harry, you're right, I really felt like doing that. It was like horrible. It was like, but they hadn't given me my plane ticket home yet. They hadn't, I couldn't just walk out into the night, So I remember thinking, okay, I can do this. I'm a showman. You know the opera Pagliacci, where he's a clown and he has to make people laugh, but just before he goes on stage, his heart is broken. And he's torn up, and he has to go up and make people laugh. Oh no, but I can do this. Watch this. I can play these. I can sing these songs, and the people were going, "Amen," and praise God, and see, I can do this. And I did it, and I got through it. It's like forcing myself through it. And I thought, never again. This is it. And that was the very last time I ever preached and performed. And I was so glad that it was over. But then afterwards, the pastor said, some of us are coming over to my house for like a little after thing, and so I went over there, and Harry and his wife came too, and I might have shaken his hand, but I was so embarrassed, I couldn't even look him in the eyes. I thought, because what he was thinking about me, what I knew that he was thinking about me, because I knew what I would be thinking about me, and so I was sitting by the Christmas tree there in this armchair, and the minister said something, I forget the exact words, but something like, isn't it wonderful that we can all come together to celebrate the birth of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, at this time of the year? And a voice from across the room said, not all of us. And I thought, wow. Now there is a real person. There's a person who's fearless. There's a person who knows that everybody's condescending, but he's not afraid to say who he is and what he is. He's liked by everybody. And those 4 words, not all of us, they were so much more powerful than any hymns I'd ever sung or sermons I've ever heard preached. A real human being expressing his real honest thoughts and unafraid of what the rest of the world thought about him. So I didn't say anything. I tried to find Harry later, and I think he moved out of town, but I wish he would read my book because I tell that story, And so I went home and I said, that's it. And I wrote a letter to everybody I could think of. In early January, I sent it out. And you can read the whole letter, just one page, telling everybody I'm not a believer anymore. And the reactions were all across the board. I lost a lot of friends, but I kept some friends. And then later that year, I got a call from the producers of this TV show in Chicago with a host named Oprah Winfrey. And Annie Laurie Gaylor and Annie Gaylor had heard my story because I wrote an article for them. And so that's where we met. We met there in Chicago, and then a few years later we got married, and then I became part of the staff of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and now, for 10 years now, I've been co-president. So, there's a lot more to say. I used to be a preacher, it's like you probably talk forever. And the joke I like to tell is that the word reverend was a typo. Did you know that? The first letter was originally an N. Some of you are against. Tomorrow you'll laugh. So anyway, in life as a non-believer is just so much better. It really, really is. The religious monkey's off my back. I'm now writing atheist freethought music. In fact, I got to write a song a year ago with the famous Broadway composer Charles Strauss, which for me was a huge honor. Charles Strauss is the guy who wrote Annie, the musical Annie, the sun will come up tomorrow, and he wrote Bye Bye Birdie and a bunch of songs. And he's a lifelong atheist, and when we interviewed him for our radio show, he said, well, I didn't know there were others, so we wrote a song together. It's called Pour It With Me. If I had a piano, I'd sing it for you. So music is still important. In fact, I think music's more important because it's a good way to really communicate real important messages to the world. And the basic reasons that I did become an atheist, which I didn't touch on, are really simple. No good definition of a God, no good evidence for a God, no agreement among believers about this God, no good reply to the problem of evil, no good argument for a God, and finally, no need. There's no need for a belief in God. Millions of people, tens of millions of people in this country, humanists and atheists and agnostics, lead really happy, loving, productive, meaningful, joyful lives without pretending that there's some supernatural world that we need to find meaning for. So, for all those reasons, I am today a happy atheist and a happy humanist. And I'll stop here. Do you want to end now, or do you want to do questions? Or,
I think we have probably about 20 minutes for questions, and that'll give you still about 15 minutes to sign books for folks.
Oh, 20 minutes, okay. That's good. Right in the front here, okay.
I'm about halfway through your book, Godless, and I have to say it's absolutely fascinating.
Oh, okay.
So I have a couple of questions. Sort of based on your thoughts on that. About the middle of your book, when you're past the conversion part,
Can you please speak
you
up?
sort of,
They can't hear you very well.
you become, it's obvious that you're just absolutely like a professional critical thinker and a master logician. And I mean, your arguments are scientific. I mean, to the max. And it's hard for me to understand how the same body could live for so many years as a Christian person who was sort of religiosity was the whole thing, when in that same body there was this master critical thinker. I guess that's what you're saying, and it happened over 4 or 5 years, but in the book it just seems like I'm reading about two totally different people.
Yeah, it is. In one sense, it is two totally different people, but in another sense, I'm just exactly the same person. I think I say in there that the motivation that drove me out of the ministry is the same motivation that drove me in. And that was the desire to know the truth and speak the truth. I was a smart guy, but I was subsuming all that. And I think most Christians and most of them are smart people. I think they really are smart. And if they would use their minds, I just wasn't using it. I was devoting it all toward this foregone conclusion. And like I said, it was sort of in my early 30s where something woke up. Something just, and I think I was a slow starter. I know other atheists and agnostics who knew right away. Annie Laurie's father, my father-in-law, said that when he was 9 years old, he was in church in Missouri with his parents. He was sitting there in church looking around, and it dawned on him, my parents are nuts. He was 9 years old and he knew it. Why did it take me so long? Why did it take me into my 30s, right? So I had to grow intellectually, and I had to gain a respect for reason and science that I had shoved aside. So I don't know why. I think we're all different. I know I was smart back then. I got good grades, and I was quick with stuff, but I was still applying it into the faith rather than applying it to the actual scientific method.
You go from one end of the bell curve to the other when you talk about susceptibility to mysticism, to no susceptibility.
Yeah, except I'm still susceptible to mysticism. Isn't that weird? I still have those experiences.
I have another question though.
Right.
It almost seemed like a throwaway line in your book, because I couldn't relate it to what else you were talking about. But you said something to the effect that you found free will was kind of a convenient way to believe in, so to speak. But of course there is no such thing, you went on to say. And then you went on to another topic, and I thought, wait a minute, back up a page, I need to understand that better.
Oh, the editor must have cut out all that good stuff. Yeah. Well, okay, there's a debate, even among atheists, about free will. And so I don't speak for all atheists. I have my opinion, and I'm sure most people in here have their own opinion. Some atheists think there's actually full libertarian free will. Others are complete determinists, there's no free will at all. I happen to be what you might call a compatibilist, in that I am a strict determinist, obviously, because otherwise you're having to violate cause and effect, right? Because every effect is a result of a previous cause. But I think that if we define free will a certain way, free will is the illusion that since we don't know our future decisions yet, we have this illusion that we have some control between now and then, right? whatever, and maybe that's just my own compatibilist definition. I was telling my daughter Sabrina when she was in high school this whole thing, and I said, you know, I think what we have is the illusion of free will, and that's what we mean by free will. If we knew the future, we wouldn't have free will. But the fact that we don't know the future, and our brains are kind of wired to try to guess the future. We're trying to anticipate as much as possible, and that anticipation of the uncertainty of the future is what kind of gives us this whole feeling of purpose. And Sabrina said, well, Dad, if we have the illusion of free will, then we have free will, if that's what you mean by free will. I'm not going to settle that argument here. I'm just going to tell you that's how I feel about it. And that would be a topic of another book entirely. Of course, in Christianity, free will is important, because how can you be accountable for your sins or for your salvation without it? A corollary, though, is that, and I do this in debate sometimes, if you do know the future, then you can't have free will. Because if the future is fixed, and you know the future, there's no period of indeterminacy between now and then where you could change your own mind. So if God knows his own future decisions, God doesn't have free will either. So something's got to give. And if God changes his mind anyway, then he wasn't omniscient, right? And if he can't change his mind, then he's not omnipotent. So it's like arguing for a married bachelor. You know, something's got to give. So I am sympathetic to both sides on the free will argument, but I don't know if it was that relevant to the actual book itself. But I'm glad you're reading it carefully. And the way in the back, she had her hand up for a while. Yeah.
I can project, it's okay. Hi, I saw a link that you were on Hannity. How do you still have a head? and furthermore, is that the one that they asked you to leave?
No, that was a different one. That was
Okay.
a Fox. That was another guy. I forget his name. Yeah, he invited me on the show, and then when I started talking, he said, "You can't say things like that on my show." I said, "Well, you invited me." And I said, "Well, you know, there's a lot of teachings of Jesus that are questionable. You can't say that. This is my show, and look at the show's name has my name on it. I'm the one who decides." But you invited me to talk, and he said, "I will not have it." And he hung up on me. He cut me off the show, right? But Hannity. I was on the radio show a few times, TV once. Annie Laurie was on Hannity just recently as well. And we actually knew him when he was a kid. I mean, like a college kid. Outside of Huntsville back in the early 90s, he invited us to his radio station. It was like almost on a dirt road. It was a little place. And Annie Laurie and I, after going on that show with this kid named Sean Hannity, we thought, boy, this is kind of like a Rush Limbaugh wannabe. What a weirdo, you know. Years later, we find out, you know, he's riding that horse all the way to the bank, you know, basically. So he's, you know, I think he's a joke, at least on his religious opinions and that. But he's got a lot of power and he's got a lot of money, and so it's debatable. Like when we get invited to go on Fox News, should we? Because who's watching, and does it make us look any better? But we do know that people watch. And Annie Laurie was on Fox and Friends yesterday, and sometimes we get letters or phone calls or emails from people saying, they're embarrassed. I don't usually watch Fox News, but I was in the airport and I happened to see, you know, I happened to see you on TV. So that happens. PR is good, and it's, and I think it's worth doing. And as long as you don't say anything totally stupid and you hold your own, and yeah. I was on O'Reilly. What was that? A couple months ago, when the Pope was on the cover of Time magazine. It was a stupid segment, and I don't even know why he had me on, but it was, you know, we picked up new members from that. So. Over here? Yeah.
So I haven't read any of your books. I did know about freedom from religion, but I never knew about you. So I'm sorry if I asked a question that you've answered before. I was intending to get to them. But as I'm listening to you, I mean, I'm personally someone who's 8 years from serving for ministry. So I'm really curious, like, because I can relate to pretty much everything you say. So I'm like wondering, like, what the future path after my own 8 years is. If you can understand what I mean by that. So one of the questions I have for you is, and I think I know the answer, but I'm not too sure. A lot of atheists speak in terms of like Gnostic atheism versus agnostic atheism. At the point where you are right now, do you still, as a thinking person, keep yourself open to the possibility? Or are you at a point where which is understandable, of course, since, you know, years of knowledge, but are you at the stage of complete Gnostic atheism where definitely there isn't a God? Or are you still at, there's no need for God, therefore I'm not going to believe in God?
Yeah, good question. And there's a dozen ways to answer that question, and I think everybody in this room would answer it in a different way. But my position is this: atheism is not a belief or a knowledge claim. Atheism is simply the absence of theism. That prefix A, the Greek prefix, privative prefix A, doesn't mean anti or against, it just means without. Like if amorality or apolitical, if you're apolitical, it doesn't mean you're anti-politics, you're just absent of that. So atheism in general is simply the absence of a belief in a God. Agnosticism addresses something entirely different. Agnosticism doesn't address belief, it addresses knowledge. An agnostic is a person who says either I don't know or I can't know if there's a God. So you can be both. In fact, most atheists are both. I am what you would call an atheistic agnostic. Not only do I not know, but I also don't believe. Agnosticism is not a halfway house. If you call yourself an agnostic, you can't escape the question, okay, you're an agnostic, but do you or don't you have a belief in a God? By whatever definition. So even most agnostics would say, well, I guess I don't have a belief in a God, I don't have knowledge, so therefore they would be called atheistic agnostics. But the question you're raising is that it is true that among atheism, which is an absence of belief, there is a subset of what some people call hard atheists. Michael Martin calls them positive atheists as opposed to negative atheists. Or some people call them Gnostic atheists as opposed to agnostic atheists, right? There's a subset of atheists that the general public thinks that's what atheists are. The deniers of God. Atheism is a belief that there's no God, or a no, there's no God. And if you define God a certain way, then I am one of those capital A atheists. Like I said earlier, if God is defined as a married bachelor, well then, that God not only doesn't exist, that God cannot exist, right? So there's hundreds of definitions of a God. So it depends on what definition of God you're asking me about. And we atheists can't run around our whole life trying to disprove every single possible definition of a God so that we can say we are capital A hard atheists about them all. We are open, most of us. But having said that, you kind of come to a point where you have to round it off, where you can round it off. For example, do leprechauns exist? Why do you say no? They might. Yeah, it's the same thing. You can't disprove the existence of leprechauns. There's evidence for leprechauns. Have you ever had a box of Lucky Charms? Right? So there's stories about leprechauns. There's people, there's history of, and we kind of know what leprechauns look like, right? So how can you say no, they don't exist? How can you be so arrogant to say no, leprechauns don't exist when there's all this evidence for them? Although you can say, well, we can understand how leprechaun stories through cultures and myth-making can arise. We'll just say the same thing about God, right? So what most of us atheists say is that we are atheistic agnostics, and a God might exist, and we're open to that. It would be great to know something like that. That would be an amazing fact of the universe. If there's a God, I would want to know that. But when you get the likelihood up to, what do scientists say, 95, 97%? They never get to 100%. But when you get close enough, you can round it off. So I can't say that there are no leprechauns, except informally I can round it off and I can say there's no leprechauns. You know what I mean? Say two different things at once. We come to a point where we're going to just go with it, because unless something else comes up after how many thousands of years of arguing about this, if something else doesn't come up, we can be pretty sure there's no God. You can't prove it. If you push you up against the philosophical wall, there might be leprechauns. They're hiding somewhere, right? You can't prove it. But I think there's enough, you can actually have enough evidence. You probably heard the saying, and I don't think this is true, but you probably heard the saying that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Have you heard that? Mm-hmm. I don't think that's true. I think absence of evidence is indeed evidence of absence. It's not proof. Absence of evidence is not proof of absence, but it's evidence of absence. And you can even hold it in your hand. Like if there was a bomb scare in this building, we all had to run outside. And the authorities came in and they went through the building with their tape and their dogs or whatever they do. And they were to come out and say, okay, it's clear, you can come back in. Would you come back in? No. Yes or no? It depends how much you trust the authorities.
If there was something like coming in for you.
Well, okay. And so, would you have proof that there's no bomb? No. But would you have evidence that there's no bomb? They would probably have a chart. They've gone through all the rooms and all the trash cans and the closets and their dog sniff. And then you can hold that in your hand. You have evidence of absence. You wouldn't have proof of absence. And I think with science, we have plenty of evidence of absence for God. We don't have total proof, but I think it's safe to go back in the building. Yeah, over here.
So I had kind of similar stories to you. I was a very active music minister. I loved to express my love for God through music. And when I deconverted, I was curious to what degree this was true as well for you. You know, all of a sudden, a lot of these Christian songs and even like Christmas songs were kind of like ice picks in my head for a while. Like a number of years, I couldn't even sing most. You know, some of the silly ones like Santa Claus or a few of those, but. You know, did you have a similar sort of experience where, like, you know, I had family members, we sit around and play music together sometimes, and sometimes it's Christian music, but I don't, you know, I don't sing along, and I would even struggle emotionally with that strong bond that I had with those, that I remembered so much, you know, love for my best friend that doesn't exist. And,
yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And there are some probably in this room who are different from you and me because they were not full-fledged true believers. When they were singing those songs like you and I were, we were in love with Jesus and we were getting the feelings. And I got goosebumps. I got actual goosebumps. And actually, I can still do it. If I go back into that mode, it's kind of weird. I used to think goosebumps were evidence of the Holy Spirit. When I now realize they're evidence of evolution. Because why do we get goosebumps? Because our hairier ancestors would raise their fur for thermal control or to scare off a predator. So when you get goosebumps, when you're cold, when you're scared, right? But I thought it was evidence of God. And so just like you, I'm uncomfortable singing those songs because it evokes to me the time, it'd be like if you broke up with somebody that you loved desperately and you had a favorite song with that person. Every time you hear that song, what are you going to think about, right? You don't want to hear that song anymore. Because no, I mean, it brings back so many memories of the love we have, but now it's gone, you know. But there are atheists and agnostics who really appreciate the music, and they're not hampered like you and I are. David Randolph was a conductor at Carnegie Hall up into his 90s, a lifelong atheist. He had the world record for Handel's Messiah, and he loved Handel's Messiah. Hallelujah, and he shall reign forever and ever. And he just got goosebumps singing. He said, I don't believe any of this stuff. And people thought he was a believer. But he just loved the music. And he said, what it is, it's the human expression that we admire. Like, you don't have to be a Muslim to admire Islamic architecture. You can say, wow, that's it. Yeah, whatever. You can look at it and say, that's amazing. If you are Muslim and you're looking at it in a different way, right? It's a validation, it's a part of your faith. But if you're outside the faith looking into it, you can just say, that's an amazing human creation expressing their heartfelt feelings that I disagree with, but it's still amazing. And so David Randolph could keep 173 full performances of Handel's Messiah with full chorus and full orchestra. He had the world record for that as an atheist. And he used to write, he said, it doesn't matter if it's, if it's for God or against God, if it's a true, sincere human expression, that's beautiful all by itself. I think a lot of Christmas music is insincere. I mean, as a jazz musician, I'm thinking, if this music were really any good, we'd be hearing it all year round, right? Yeah. And some of it, and religion has created some beautiful music, and it's created a lot of crap, too. How many worship choruses have you heard that are like, So, I know exactly what you're saying, but luckily, for me at least, I don't know what you're doing, but I have the musical outlet through jazz piano. And when I'm playing in a band, with it's the right band in the right venue, and we're all of a sudden this sort of magical thing happens, where we're looking at each other, and the song becomes something greater than the sum of its parts, and all of a sudden it's like there's this big capital S song out there, and it's to live for, if you know what I mean, as a musician. When those moments happen, it's like, whoa, and it's just, it's great. We know it's an illusion. We know there's not some big, but it's an illusion to live for, it's an illusion to be a part of that art. And maybe you have found, I hope, some way to still participate in that feeling of musical expression. And by the way, an awful lot of music that we have come to know and love was written by non-believers. And you'd be surprised how much of it is. Somewhere over the rainbow, the #1 movie song of all time. Yip Harburg was an atheist. Brahms' Lullaby. How many people sing their kids to sleep? When you graduate, Elgar's Pomp and Circumstances. Later in life, he became an atheist. Richard Rogers, oh, a dear, a female dear. Of course, Charles Strauss that I already mentioned, with Annie and then Schumann and Brahms, and all of these, and great music, and some religious music. Brahms' Requiem. There were 3 atheists who wrote Requiems: Brahms, Berlioz, and Verdi. Verdi was a real outspoken anti-clerical atheist, but he occasionally would use the Bible as a text, like he would use any other text. Not that he believed it, but he would use it as a text. So, just because you hear a religious song doesn't mean it's religious music.
Artists too.
Art, yeah, any type of art, yeah. Sculpture, painting, dance, yeah.
I had it sounds like your exit from Christianity was you met people that weren't quite on the four square, yeah. And so then you started allowing for them. It seems like you've also met a lot of people who have come out, exited. My experience is that when I was trying to convert people and prove my point, the more I tried to prove it, the sillier it sounded to me. And I've started noticing that too, that it's kind of a waste of time to try to disprove a person's religion. So I just basically ask them questions to keep them coming and hope that they'll come to the same realization that I did. Is that what you found, or did you find it sillier the more you talked about it?
Yeah, but it was only afterwards that I started seeing how ridiculous it was. Because I was so in love with it at the time, and I was so disappointed that it wasn't true. It was hard for me to get to a stance of actually ridiculing it, you know what I mean? Feel like you had a love relationship with somebody and it's over. Do you want to poke fun at them now? Or do you want to, you know what I mean? So it took a while. But of course, if something is ridiculous, then it can be ridiculed, right? And some of those beliefs are ridiculous. But I didn't knowingly meet any other non-believers until later, until afterwards. And as far as I knew, I was the only one, which I think is kind of good. It's like we non-believers didn't join some movement. It wasn't like we jumped on a bandwagon or something. Every one of you probably came at it on your own. It wasn't that somebody convinced you. It's bottom up. It's organic. It's free thought. It's us, each of us making our own decisions. And I think some of those people you're talking with are never going to change their mind, but some of them will. I did, and I know people who do. I know people who come out of a debate saying, hey, you made a good point, and later saying they changed their mind. So it does happen. I don't know how we can predict to whom that will happen. Some people, I think, they're going to die in their faith no matter what. And as long as they're not causing unnecessary harm, do we really care? You know, if their actions are causing harm, then maybe we should say something about that. If they're giving to a church that's oppressing women or something, or you know, fighting progress or gay marriage, we should say something about their actions. But many of them are never going to change. And what can we do about that? That's freedom of thought.
Okay, we have time for one more question. And then we still have the signing period, so you can always stick around after that.
Hi, so I also grew up very religious. My whole life I grew up in a Christian church, Christian private school, the work of the Charlotte community. And I began my transition into atheism. It was a very long process, like you said, about 4 or 5 years. But I think it was mostly heavily influenced by being troubled by the role and representation of women within not only the Bible but Christianity itself. And now I'm a gender studies major in political science, and many of the other feminists that I have met are also atheists, agnostics, humanists, or what have you. But I have met a few have continued to hold on to their Christian faith. And I was just curious if you think that there is a place or if there is room for feminism within Christianity.
Yeah, there is. And there are a lot of great Christian people doing good work. I would say in spite of their Christianity, but they would say they're motivated by their Christianity. And like I said, there's all these different versions of Christianity. There are a bunch of people over here on the more liberal side. There are some women who think Jesus was the first feminist, believe it or not. Because they're feminists and they love their faith, and so they see Jesus as a feminist. Because he had women friends, right, in the New Testament. Annie Laurie is not one of those women. Annie Laurie is a third-generation atheist, and she's written books about, you may have heard of her book, Women Without Superstition, Collective Writings of Women, that it was the church that was holding back women's rights for so many centuries. Elizabeth Cady Stanton fought for almost a half century. She was an outspoken atheist. You know, she was the author of the Equal Rights Amendment for women. And she died before she saw that pass. But she said that everywhere she went, it was the church and the Bible that were the greatest stumbling blocks. Because the Bible says women should keep silent. Women slaves were worth half as much as male slaves. And all of that, you know all that stuff in the Bible. But the church really has held it back. We surveyed our membership a few years ago and asked, what's the main reason you left your faith if you were raised religious? The main one was intellectual. But right under that was social. The church's harm in the world, including the harm to women and the harm to gay rights and such, and the treatment of the church toward indigenous cultures and all that kind of thing as well. So I think your motivation is legitimate. It's one of the legitimate motivations for leaving. You don't have to become a Bible scholar, a theologian to understand it all before you reject it on total intellectual grounds. You can just look at the actions of the religion and say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And I think that's valid because people should be judged by their fruits. I still think there's some good teachings in the Bible, and that's one of them. And in Madison, where we live, most of the churchgoers are very liberal, and we all march in the same parades. You know, we all march together, and you know that there's a lot of Bible-believing Christians and even Catholics that are like pro-choice and pro-birth control and so on. And so we don't care. We'll march together and for a common cause. And if their faith is not harming the world in some way, then what threat are we to them, right? Let's work together on what really matters. And it's up to you how far you want to go in trying to convince one of your believing friends, you know, about the problem with the Bible. There's no easy answer to that. It's up to you. I guess if they come to you, you could answer the question. So yeah, I would applaud that. Let's judge people by their actions, and if they're doing good things, if they're working for women's rights, great. Let's march together. And atheists or whatever you are, you know, if you're working for gay rights, let's all get the practical job done, regardless of whatever your motivation is behind all of it. Reverend?
Dan, thank you so much for coming. I want to thank everybody else for coming tonight as well. And just a couple of reminders. Dan will be sticking around for a few minutes to sign books just over there by the exit door. If there ends up being a line, we'll use the banister over here. If you are interested in forming a Secular Student Alliance chapter or affiliate here on campus, please see Dan right over here in this corner. And if you want to be a part of our second Secular Lobby Day up in the Capitol, please see Rachel in the purple sweater over here. Come out and see us at the Stockton Asparagus Festival next weekend. If you want more information on Camp Quest, you can talk to me. Please consider supporting our group so we can have more events like this happen. If nothing else, just go to our websites, look at the calendars, and show up to more events, especially the ones that we have coming up in Manteca pretty soon. Happy Earth Day to everybody on Tuesday. Have a great evening. Thank you for coming.